Your students are telling stories in a world where the affordances of digital media has allowed them to create, share, and collaborate in more multimodal ways. It's important before we begin our specific study of the digital story form to have a brief overview of storytelling in the digital sphere and to remind ourselves of the ways in which storytelling has evolved in digital spaces and yet at its core continues to remain the same. Storytelling now occurs in spaces you probably wouldn't ever think of, like social media sites. Young people have always used things like Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram to tell stories, essentially. They've used these sites to talk about what they've done over the day, what their aspirations are, where they are going next. This is a form of storytelling, a simple one, but it is a form of storytelling. Now, young media producers are actually using these spaces like Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat to actually experiment with the form of the story in a digital context. So here, for example, is quite a famous Instagram feed by a young journalist called Neil Shea, who literally has about 50,000 followers on his Instagram. He essentially travels the world, takes photographs, uploads them to Instagram, and writes small stories about the people in the photographs next to them. He is part of a generation of Instagram storytellers who are now managing to inspire other people to also tell stories on Instagram. There have, of course, been some quite famous attempts on other sites, such as Twitter, for example, to use the form, to use the hashtag, to use all of the affordances of this form, such as its brevity and its capacity to be shared, retweeted, and collaborate and to create collaborative narratives with lots of people. Interestingly, Twitter has recently held quite a few fiction festivals over the years. You can have a look at some of the examples. You've got writers from all over the world who are participating in creating collaborative narratives on Twitter. Sometimes they're collaborative, in fact, and sometimes they're meant to exist as their own. So here's one from writer Rachel. Someone silently points. There. They're here. Through the 2 panes of glass, I look for her, heart thumping. You can see that she's used some of those affordances of Twitter. So, for example, the hashtag, in order to link up with other people who are also writing Twitter fiction and using the form in new ways that we might not have thought of before. Storytelling in these digital spheres is a more collaborative act. On a simple level, that's because these nonlinear texts require a greater level of interaction. The audience has to decide the pace, the order in which it goes, and this affects the narration. It affects how the story is told and also how the story is received. Take, for example, one of my current really favorite forms of new media storytelling is this kind of storytelling. This is called a web documentary, and this is one of the most famous web documentaries currently on the internet. It's called Welcome to Pine Point, and it's essentially about a bunch of men who grew up in a mining town which has since disappeared, and they collected together old artifacts of that time and their time growing up in this community to create this piece. So this piece, again, is what we call a digital web documentary, or a web doc, as some people would call it. It's a really interesting way of remediating old forms of storytelling. So storytelling that we might have previously used things like scrapbooks or photographs or home videos for, and they've placed these older forms of storytelling into a new format that's incredibly interesting to look at and incredibly involving for the reader. Again, how you read it depends on you. You can go into as much or as little depth as you want to in each of its segments. But depending on where you go and how you choose to explore, you will in fact get a slightly different story. That's what a lot of digital narratives do these days. They allow the reader to have that much control over the story that they are seeing. Other new media narratives, such as this one, which was recently made by SBS. This is an animated version of Nam Lee's short story, The Boat. What is really interesting about this text is that not only does it involve you in the story because you get to decide the pace and which sections you concentrate on by scrolling, but it's essentially a completely full body reading experience. It's what we call haptic. So it engages with your senses in order for you to completely get the full effect of the story. So you can see here that as I scroll through this story about refugees coming from Vietnam to Australia on a boat, the text is literally tipped sideways in the same fashion that the author is describing the characters would have gone through in their text. So again, by engaging in our senses, and the fact that many of these new digital media narratives allow for so much engagement with our senses, we have a completely different kind of reading experience. The audience can literally also collaborate and change the kinds of stories that they read and that they write online. One really famous example of this, for example, is fan fiction. I think we probably all know by now that Stephenie Meyer, who has sold so many millions and millions of books now, started out writing fan fiction. As did a lot of other quite famous contemporary authors. What's really interesting about this, I find at least, is the popularity of fan fiction amongst younger people. So, for example, if you click on any of these fan fiction sites, and I'm doing that now, you can see that, in fact, look at the amount of people who are participating in writing fan fiction. So, fan fiction, again, it's when people get online, and they can do it not online, but most people do it online, and they write responses to their favorite text. So they might, for example, write the story of a minor character in a text who doesn't get much attention. They might continue the text or write the prequel to the text. But again, look at how many people are online writing fan fiction. And again, these people are mostly very, very young. So this one, for example, has 402,000 people who are contributing to the writing of this story of Naruto, who is a manga or Japanese anime figure. But they're not just Japanese, they're people who are coming, and again, mostly young people who are participating in a narrative all around the world.